everybody. It's Wednesday. Now that the new year started, I've totally lost track of the days again. But as it is the beginning of the year, what better way to start off 2024 than with North Korea issuing nuclear threats to the United States? So last week during an annual end of year meeting for the Workers' Party of Korea, Kim Jong-un announced his goals. Might as well be king, right?
I'm sure he would love if we called him king.
Well, he announced his goals for 2024 by pledging to launch 3 additional military spy satellites, to produce more nuclear materials, and to introduce modern attack drones. And his comments in the meeting suggested that he will be setting up tests before our presidential elections here in the US in November. So as reported by Express.com, according to the official Korean Central News Agency, sorry, I'm losing my voice for some reason all of a sudden.
That time of year, everyone's sick.
Yeah, sorry, guys. But during this 5-day meeting, Kim Jong-un called war, quote, inevitable, and said that vicious anti-North Korea moves by the United States have reached extremes unprecedented in history, and that this is pushing the Korean Peninsula to the brink of nuclear war. So he is calling for overwhelming war response capability for his country's military to pacify the entire territory of South Korea. So in his speech, he basically said that he's ending any kind of diplomacy with South Korea and called South Korea a, quote, hemiplegic malformation and colonial subordinate state whose society is tainted by Yankee culture, end quote, and that it must not be considered as a partner for reconciliation or unification. And France 24 reported that he ordered plans to reorganize departments that are handling cross-border affairs to, quote, fundamentally shift direction, end quote, to war response capability. And he's also ordered his military to use all available means to conquer South Korea in the event of a conflict, including nuclear weapons. CNN Digital reported that he stated, quote, it's time for us to acknowledge the reality and clarity of our relationship with the South. And if Washington, D.C. and Seoul were to attempt any kind of military confrontation, North Korea's nuclear war deterrent will not hesitate to take nuclear action. So tensions have obviously been heating up between North Korea and the United States ever since Trump left office. And we talked about this briefly in a couple of podcasts last month, but when North Korea recently launched a spy satellite in December, the White House warned that, quote, any nuclear attack by North Korea against the US or its allies is unacceptable and will result in the end of the Kim regime, end quote. And Biden had dispatched a nuclear-powered submarine to the South Korean city of Busan last month and conducted joint military exercises with Seoul and Tokyo, and we flew long-range bombers. All of this is a way to basically try to deter North Korea. But Stephanie, with the United States is so overcommitted with so many of our military resources to Ukraine for the past couple of years, and now this ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas, and then the fact that U.S. military recruitment is down, as we've discussed several times, and Biden is more focused on getting rid of oil and gas than vamping up our military capabilities and readiness. Do you think we actually have the resources to make good on this promise?
Well, initially I say no, but the one thing that makes me think maybe, possibly we do is the fact that once again, the Pentagon is missing trillions of dollars. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I've tried to dig into it a little bit more. But according to an article by defensenews.com that came out in November, they reported, quote, for the 6th year in a row, the Pentagon failed its annual audit. The result is not a surprise. The Department of Defense's assets are vast and decentralized, accounting to $3.8 trillion alongside $4 trillion in liabilities. These are located in all 50 states and more than 4,500 sites around the world, end quote. So when I read that, I was thinking okay, I think about Ukraine and the 113 or 130, depending on what you read, $billion that we've sent them, which sounds just like an insane amount. But compared to our military as a whole, it sounds like that's a drop in the bucket. And like seeing how there's no audit that's been passed with the Pentagon tells me that there's like a ton that we don't know about our military, a lot of black ops projects and things like that. So I don't really know what our military capability is. And in a way, like that gives me a sense of hope that behind the scenes, maybe we are stronger and more prepared than we appear. Or maybe it just proves how corrupt our government has become. And one thing that I do absolutely think is that the military industrial complex is who is really running the show behind the scenes, which means unless Trump gets back in office, we're going to see more senseless wars all over the world because the people profiting from these wars, they have their bunkers, so they could give two shits about the country or anyone in it and what happens to us. But as Donald Trump said, no one wins in a nuclear war. We all die. And
Yeah.
I don't trust Kim Jong un whatsoever, nor do I trust Iran. Now, I do think that China and Russia are smart and patient, and I don't think they'll just go and start a nuclear war because America has too many valuable assets. And like, I dug into this last night, but according to Statistica, the US is the largest exporter of agricultural products. So if there's a nuclear war here, like there goes the world's food supply. And, America is rich in natural resources. And of course, we're not mining them because of our stupid administration. But under Trump, we had energy independence and would have become a lead exporter. So I would think that China and Russia are smart enough and patient enough to go about some other way to acquire those resources. So I think from them, like I do think an EMP attack or cyber attack is very likely. And I guess it's already happening to a certain degree. But again, North Korea and Iran are wild cards. I think anything could happen. And I mean, Kim did say that his country needs to prepare for war based on increased US confrontations and that his country would thoroughly annihilate the US and South Korea if provoked. So that is not very comforting.
Yeah, and one of the other things that article on express.com talked about was experts are saying that Kim, I keep wanting to say King, Jesus. Kim Jong-un's actions are basically going to hinge on whether or not Trump gets reelected. Because ever since diplomacy with the West broke down, he's been focusing on modernizing his nuclear arsenal. And there's a professor at Korea University in South Korea named Nam Sung-wook. And he said that if Biden is reelected, North Korea is going to get what it wants. But if Trump is elected, it could revive diplomacy and renew talks about sanctions relief based on partial surrender of North Korea's nuclear program. And he also said that Kim Jong-un vowing to ramp up production of plutonium and uranium to build more nuclear weapons is basically like a tactic to strengthen North Korea's negotiating cards, and he predicted they're also going to test launch more intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the continental US this year. He said, quote, North Korea will act to the fullest extent under its timetable for provocation until the US election day, end quote. And then I read another article in National Interest that similarly reported that unlike Trump, Biden isn't going to meet with Kim Jong-un without extensive prep work done by his staff beforehand and pre-May agreed concessions by North Korea, because we know he can't think independently to begin with, and he probably wouldn't even communicate what was told to him by others appropriately anyway. So it makes sense for Kim Jong-un to wait and see what happens with the US elections. And it's pretty clear he has zero respect for Biden at all. Like, how do you think this might play out if Biden stays in office?
Well, I mean, it's perfectly clear no one has respect for Biden. Literally no one. Like he's weak, he's likely compromised. And the world has seen his disastrous results with the withdrawal from Afghanistan and then like his idiotic moves, like sending our resources to Ukraine, depleting our oil reserves. And think about it. Everyone in the world knows that Trump is leading everyone in the polls, left and right. And he was the only leader that ever had a good relationship with Kim. I think he's the only leader that actually talked to Kim. And I remember him saying that when he became president, Obama told him that North Korea was like the biggest threat. So Trump asked him, okay, well, what have the talks and negotiations been like? And Obama's response was, there have been none. And so Trump went over there and actually met with him. He's like, this guy's the biggest threat, and you haven't even talked to him. So he went over there and established a relationship and had conversations. And for the first time in my life, we had a diplomatic relationship with North Korea, and we weren't being threatened by them with nuclear war. And now look at where we're at a few short years later with Biden. And, now, just like I said, the military industrial complex is back in charge, and it's not good for anyone but the elites that are going to profit from it.
You just said something interesting there as well, because the more I read about Kim Jong-un, the more I understand why he respects Trump. The shit that comes out of this guy's mouth is literally like the kind of stuff that Trump said. Like when it comes to their demeanor and their confidence and their bravado and everything else, like they are two peas in a pod. And so one's not going to walk over the other. Whereas Kim Jong-un knows he can walk all over Biden, right? I mean, regardless of the threat of our military capabilities, his speech was very clear that he has no fucking respect for the United States at this point. And meanwhile, North Korea is looking to build cooperation with Russia and China. And there's already US intelligence indicating that North Korea has provided Russia with more than 1,000 containers of military equipment and munitions for the war in Ukraine, just like we're doing for the Ukraine side. And I read an article in Interesting Engineering that said there's an estimate on the size of North Korea's current arsenal that is ranging from like 20 to 30 bombs to more than 100 bombs. So like we don't know what their true capabilities are, but it sounds like whatever their current status is, there's going to be major efforts to vamp that up. And North Korea has tested over 100 ballistic missiles in the past year, many of which were their most advanced nuclear capable missiles that can reach the US. And then they already have shorter range missiles that are capable of reaching South Korea and Japan. And this national interest article also pointed out that North Korea, Russia, China, and Iran are finding more and more opportunities to work together. And during this meeting of the Korean Workers' Party, where Kim made all these outrageous comments about increasing nuclear capacity, he also called for more strategic cooperation with the anti-imperialist independent countries. So it seems like we are indeed shaping up for dividing the world for World War III, with North Korea, Russia, and China on one side, and then the US, Japan, and South Korea having their own alliance.
Well, yeah. And the BRICS alliance, right? It's like all of these countries that are gearing up for war are all of the countries that are joining together and have a long-term plan for their currency and economy if the US is taken out of power. So they all have a vested interest to start war with the United States and take us out.
Yeah, and I have to mention this too, because I just read this right before the podcast, but another article came out in express.com saying that South Korea has already revealed that it's preparing for potential assassination of Kim Jong-un, and they are conducting, quote, decapitation drills, end quote. So reportedly, the South Korean defense minister, Shin Won-sik, told state media that Seoul is performing assassination drills and that U.S. Army Special Forces have been participating in these drills since December. And specifically, one of the things he told state television was, quote, while it is difficult to openly discuss decapitation, the ROK U.S. Special Forces are conducting training, ... So
that's
like
very
they're
specific. Like they're not
yeah,
just saying assassination, they're saying decapitation. Like what?
decapitation.
Oh
Yeah.
my God. Well, and meanwhile, we've pissed off everyone. Like, who in the world isn't pissed at America at this point, you know? And then when you take a look at our allies and like the UN has been openly pro-Palestine, making all sorts of remarks about, the Palestinians. And then Europe has been weak at best with the war in Ukraine and Israel, letting the US take the lead on the funding. We have Germany's economy, which is failing. We have the energy in Europe, which is in crisis mode. And so it's like every, great world dominant player throughout history has fallen at some point. Like we have to look at history. They say history repeats itself. And when you look at the Roman Empire before its collapse, there are a lot of similarities between it and the United States now. I found this article from nation.com, and it points out that, quote, there are signs that some of the same factors that fractured the Roman Empire back in 476 CE and others since are distinctly present in this country today, even in California, one of its richest states. I'm talking about phenomena like gross economic inequality, overspending on military expansion, political corruption, deep cultural and political fissures, and oh, yes, the barbarians at the gates, end quote. So, like, we are in the same situation where we've gotten too cocky and done a lot of stupid things in the past few years, and we've pissed off the whole world.
Yeah, it's funny, not funny, but interesting that you mentioned that, because I remember having a conversation with a coworker like 3 years ago, and he was talking about how the United States is completely in line with the path that resulted in the fall of Rome. And over the past 2 years, we've just seen that escalate to such an extreme. And like, I didn't think we'd be throwing the idea of nuclear war into the mix of everything that else is going wrong, but here we are. And then, so I want to mention this because this also came across my newsfeed right before we recorded this article. And apparently officials in New Jersey conducted a nuclear disaster drill today in portions of New Jersey and eastern Delaware. And the New Jersey Office of Emergency Management said, there's no emergency, the public doesn't have to do anything. But they did this like full-scale test of their equipment at the Salem and Hope Creek nuclear generating stations. And maybe this is just a routine test, but I thought the timing of this was rather interesting.
No, I don't believe in coincidences. And when you look at, how many billionaires are building bunkers right now, it's concerning. Like, they're preparing for the worst. And with all that being said, I think we need to come back to like keeping in mind that there's going to be a lot of fear that they're going to try to inject in the people, because with fear, they have power and control. And I think it's really important to be aware, but not to dwell on fear of what will happen, and instead like focus on the outcome we want. It's
Yep.
always a good idea to be prepared, to have a family plan and all of that, like in case of emergency, but focus your attention and your energy on the best case scenario. And I don't know about you, Tara, but like in my mind, the best case scenario is preventing an all-out war is getting Biden out and Trump in.
Mhm.
And regardless of what anyone thinks of Trump and his tweets and his orange hair or whatever, he kept the peace. He kept the peace before, and other leaders respected him and they feared him. And you can't really deny that. And so I think he's our best shot. And I think we need to focus on getting his ass back in office, because I don't care how many stupid things he says or how many tweets he puts out. If we are safe as a country, that is my number one priority for the presidency.
Yeah, I think Trump is definitely our best shot, especially in terms of our interactions with other countries. But it's just a matter of, can we get there without internally destroying our own country in the process?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a really good question. And I think between now and November, it's going to be a little crazy because they're
Yeah.
going to do everything they can to prevent that. And meanwhile, we have these external threats. But again, I think, we believe so strongly in the law of attraction, and we can't dwell on the fear. We have to like keep, visualizing the outcome that we want. And I think
Yep.
people need to keep like speaking up. And um I've been seeing more and more of that. I think 2024, we're going to see more of that, because I think people are starting to realize like, hey, our whole life, our whole way of being, everything is at stake. And so if you're going to speak up, if you're going to do anything, now's the time. So hopefully we'll see more of that this year. And
And we're going to continue speaking out.
that's right. Yep. We are doing it. And hopefully we're inspiring other people to do that too, because there's a lot at stake right now. So, yeah, you guys help speak out, share this episode with whoever you can to get the word out there and just to start educating people on what's really happening. Like, get your head out of the sand and pay attention because there are some major things going on in the world. So, thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you back here on Friday.